Erected to the undying memory of Michael Patrick Lynch of Lyre, Carrignavar, shot by state forces at Marsh's Yard, Cork, on the 13th of August 1934 on the occasion of a public protest by the farmers of County Cork against gross injustice. That's the headstone quotation. May he rest in peace. And the quotation that's attached to it at the base of the monument by William Jennings Bryan states thus: "The humblest citizen of all the land, when clad in the armour of a righteous cause, is stronger than all the hosts of error." That's William Jennings Bryan, used as the quotation on the headstone. We are standing in a small cemetery on the north side of Cork City. It is September 2017. We're standing at a gravestone commemoration of a man who was shot in August 1934. Dunbullogue Cemetery is a small country graveyard. Its most prominent headstone and monument is this one that we're standing near. It is to the memory of a man called Michael Patrick Lynch, and Michael Patrick Lynch's story is a story of events that go back to 1934 and the era of the economic war and the era of the organisation known as the Blue Shirts. One of the features of economic times in 1933, when Fianna Fáil won power and took government, was that they immediately ceased to pay land annuities to the British government. And to explain what that was, in 1905, there was an arrangement whereby loans were made available from the British government to Irish landowners to purchase land from the large estates under a scheme known as the Windham Act. Those loans were at preferential terms, and it enabled small farmers to buy larger tracts of land at favourable terms. The money was loaned through the Irish state and was to be repaid to the British state. That was being done after independence from 1922 to 1932 by the Commemoration government. The land annuity payments were being repaid to the UK government. The farmers had their land, they were happy, they were paying the land annuities, the deal was done. However, the Fianna Fáil government reneged and decided they wouldn't send the land annuities back to the UK government. In 1932, they said that was against their principles. That prompted what was then known as the economic war, when the UK government levied strong trade tariffs on the Irish state, and led to a situation whereby Ireland was in an economic trade war with the UK. That trade war affected primarily the farming community, whose commodity basically was live animals, livestock being sent to England, cattle farmers primarily. Tariffs were applied to those exports to the UK, and the farmers couldn't sell their animals. This was one of the two or three main planks of grievance of the Blue Shirts, which recruited strongly amongst the farming community. It also recruited in the urban areas against the rise of the National Congress, which was the Irish Communist organisation in the early 30s. And there was probably a lingering hangover from the Civil War era. There were the pro-treaty forces who stood by the state, and ex-army servicemen formed in 1932 an organisation known as the Army Comrades Association, as a benevolent and lobby association for ex-army servicemen who thought they might lose some of their entitlements under the new Fianna Fáil regime. That wasn't the case. But anyway, what quickly emerged is that after the formation of Fine Gael and the Cumann na Gael party in 1932-33, elections in that era were very fraught with attacks on Fine Gael, Cumann na Gael meetings. Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil forces would frequently try to disrupt Cumann na Gael election meetings, and the Army Comrades Association volunteered to provide protection to these meetings, and did so. And the most prominent leader at that point was a man called Ned Cronin, who is buried in another country cemetery in County Cork. To move on then, or move back to the land annuities issue and the confiscation of farmers' cattle. When they didn't pay the land annuities because the government wasn't repaying the loan back to the UK and they were suffering because they couldn't sell their cattle, they decided they wouldn't hand over the land annuities to the Irish state, the new Irish government under de Valera. That then provoked a response from the government in seizing the farmers' cattle who reneged or who didn't pay the land annuities. The farmers' cattle were seized, held in large compounds and subsequently auctioned at public auctions where people would come and bid. These were very, very emotive affairs, and there was high tension at many of these auctions. There were secret bidders on behalf of large farming interests elsewhere in the country who came to buy the cattle. This obviously greatly upset those whose cattle were confiscated, and they would come and try and either get the cattle back from the compounds or prevent the sale of the cattle, or follow where the cattle went after subsequent successful bidding at auction. In any event, there were very strong scenes at these auctions. The most famous, or I suppose notorious, of all of these was an auction that was held on the 13th of August 1934 in the centre of Cork City at a premises in Copley Street run by the firm of Marsh's Auctions. They were contracted to sell the cattle in the area. And they had a yard in Copley Street which is known as Marsh's Yard, and was until the Celtic Tiger boom in the mid-2000s when it was redeveloped for an office block. That yard survived as a commercial yard, and that is where the cattle were brought on that day in 1934. This was well signalled, and it was of great interest obviously to the farming community whose animals were seized, and there was a large assembly of farmers arrived on the day with the intention of releasing the cattle. Their plan was to ram the gates of the auction, which they did, with a specially reinforced truck with an iron hoop at the front. So they came through the gate, and they were followed by their followers, young farmers in the area who had come on the day. Immediately that the gates were broken down and the crowd moved in, shots were fired from state forces located on the roof of the buildings within the yard. They shot down on the crowd of farmers entering through the gates to release their cattle, and several people were hit and several people were wounded, and one young man of 20 years of age was shot and killed by state forces in the effort to release the cattle that were confiscated from their premises. That was Michael Patrick Lynch. He was of a farming family based north of Cork City. He was 20 years of age. They were wearing their blue shirts on the day. He was shot and killed, and 80 years later his blue shirt is retained by that family with the bullet hole through the shirt, in memory of their fallen ancestor. This is the monument that is erected at the grave of Michael Patrick Lynch, which is a family grave of the Lynch family. The people on the roof were known as the Bry Harriers, eponymously named for Eamon Bry, Ned Bry, more famous possibly as an associate of Michael Collins in the War of Independence. The Bry Harriers, who were de Valera's, how would I describe them?
Henchmen.
Right, I was looking for a word. Prompt from the sides. And his forces were stationed on the roof with arms, which the farmers didn't have. They weren't expecting to be shot, but shot they were. An inquest was held very, very swiftly after, just possibly showing the efficiency of the times maybe compared to the current day. Within days the inquest started into the events, and subsequently the inquest into the death of Michael Patrick Lynch, which went right to the court level. And the Irish Times, in reporting it, were highly critical of the actions of the state forces and the excessive force that was used, and obviously the loss of life and the wounding and the killing of a young man. That's on record by the paper of record, as it would like to be known, and is to some extent. Recalling as best I can from memory, the judge at the inquest, in delivering his summation, said that the actions and the tactics used by state forces, the forces of our government at the time, and the people who carried them out, that they were an excrescence on the good name and the standing of the Irish state and its law enforcement agencies. An excrescence on their name. That, I think, is a very, very strong statement made at the inquest at the time. Yeah. Michael Patrick Lynch was taken to a nearby hospital after the killing, and the funeral was organised to his local cemetery, Dunbullogue, here north of Cork City. It was attended by many, many thousands. The funeral cortege left the city and came here, and photographic record is of the large, very large crowds assembled on the roadside here on the day in August 1934. The graveside oration was delivered by General Owen O'Duffy, who was the leader of the Blue Shirts, then known as the National Guard. And shortly after, this very impressive commemoration monument was erected next to the family headstones of the Lynch family. There is something quite symbolic other than the monument as we see it here, which is how a person would approach it, with the inscriptions and the family history. There is something quite symbolic about it which encapsulates really what the whole events of Marsh's Yard were all about, and how simple they were, and how basic they were, and how important they were to the people who were in Marsh's Yard on the farming side on the day. And to see that it's very subtle, it's not evident on the front of the monument, but to see the subtlety of the message, which I think will only be understood by those who understand the history as best I have been able to outline it. We'll go to the rear of the monument, and depicted there is a very simple symbology which illustrates the cause that the farmers were protesting about on that day, and why Michael Patrick Lynch gave his life in 1934. And it's a very simple cause. So we'll go to the rear of the monument, and under the shadow of yew trees in this oldest part of the cemetery, what we will see is a very simple symbol that encapsulates the struggle that led to the events of Marsh's Yard, and indeed many other of those cattle auctions in the 1930s. We see a cow suckling its calf. That's as simple as it was to the farmers, was being taken from them. Their livelihood was being taken from them. It's symbolised in the very simple message of nature. The cow and the calf that they reared, sold for a livelihood and made their living from, that livelihood was taken from them in the annuities struggle, and that's how simple it was. The farmers were protesting against the loss of their livestock and trying to right the injustices they saw that was being done to them very specifically. So I want to thank all those people who have come here today to Dunbullogue in September 2017. It's 83 years now since Michael Patrick Lynch died. People still visit this monument. It's one of the least known commemorations of that era. There are others, but the side of Michael Patrick Lynch and the organisation that he supported, the National Guard, is one that is usually commented on in a derogatory fashion, misrepresented, misunderstood, to some extent no great interest in understanding the message in the first place. And obviously there are disingenuous comparisons made with other extreme movements abroad. It was literally a farmers' ginger group on one level. It was also in the urban areas an anti-communist Christian organisation. That was an issue of the time. I sometimes make a comparison without, I hope this won't be misunderstood. It was literally a sort of I won't call it a paramilitary, but a militant Macra na Ferma of its time. It was, which is, we were, just to put it in perspective, they were farmers but who had to take a little bit more of direct action to safeguard their interests. And that ended in the unfortunate death of Michael Patrick Lynch. So I leave you with that thought. He's not forgotten by many, though forgotten or unknown by many others. But to his memory we will pay homage today, and thank you for your attention, as best I can recall the tale of 83 years ago. Gormav,